Citizens of the world, we are at war. I know. And it's the most brutal kind of war. Money war. That's right, folks. Over the past few weeks, financial markets have been in a tornado of turbulence after the US of A fired off hot new rules from our trade policy cannons that have completely turned the globe upside down. And if you're wondering why it was absolutely necessary for us to unleash this economic hellfire onto the world, the answer is, I do not know. Before 2 weeks ago, I thought tariff was nothing more than the name of my estranged Mormon son. You can come home anytime, buddy. We still love you. But nope. According to Investopedia, a tariff is a tax that one country imposes on goods and services that it imports from another country. By making imports more expensive, countries can use tariffs to achieve certain strategic goals, like getting a trade partner to behave in a certain way, creating a competitive economic advantage for yourself, or balancing your budget. Perhaps most importantly, though, a tariff is something that makes my president and commander-in-chief Donald J. Trump absolutely sprung.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary. Then I was reprimanded by the fake news. They said, what about love, religion, and God? I said, I agree. Let's put God number one, religion number two, love, I don't know. We got to put that number three, I guess, right? And then it's tariff.
Up until this Trump administration, tariffs between the US and other nations were pretty low. I mean, you know as well as me, the effective average tariff on imports coming into the US was 2.5% as of last year. But this year, after a couple of months of foreplay, President Trump's love for tariffs climaxed in a 53-minute orgasm he called Liberation Day, which, if nothing else, is a pretty sick thing to call your orgasm. On Lib Day, Trump proudly held up a poster, Scholastic Book Fair style, that announced massive tariffs on every country in the world, including China, our closest allies, and those freeloading motherfuckers over on Christmas Island. These were some of the highest US tariffs we've ever seen, and after they were announced, the stock market made like a heavy rock and plummeted. Heavy rock. Are you guys fucking kidding me with this script? This was followed by a drop in global stock markets, then the US bond market, forcing Trump to back off and announce a 90-day pause on a lot of his beloved tariffs, which for a minute looked like it made the economy happy, but then everyone realized that tariffs were still really high, and also Trump was still tariffing the other biggest economy in the world and one of our largest trading partners in China, at which point the economy basically got sad again, forcing Trump to back off again and say, hey, maybe let's exempt the big stuff like smartphones and electronics from the China tariffs, which made the economy a little bit happy again. But then Trump's Commerce Secretary said that the exemption would only be temporary. Haha, trade war! It's a lot to digest, it's a lot to follow. Every day we're gonna keep getting bombarded with news, and you're gonna wanna move to a beach hut in Central America where you'll spend the rest of your days drinking homemade rum and gambling on scorpion fights. Sounds pretty sweet. The point is, this is all very confusing. But if one thing is clear, is that this Trump administration seems pretty bent on upending the old world order of trade.
There's this whole theory of like international trade and everyone gets richer if everyone kind of does what they're best at. The administration is kind of holding a gun up to that model. This is a potential massive like reordering of the global trade system that's been in place, I think, for about 8 decades.
The order that we now have is one based around broadly free trade, although there are obviously a lot of exceptions to that, relatively low tariffs, and relatively free capital flows between different countries.
Paul Kiernan reports on the U.S. economy for the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, Stephen Kamin is the former director of international finance at the Federal Reserve. And listen, I got a whole stable of nerdy men out back ready to help us out in our time of confusion. So why don't you kick back and relax, and let me roll these dogs across your screen, all right?
It's pretty murky exactly what President Trump and his colleagues want to replace that with. But it's pretty clear that President Trump feels that the United States has been ill-served by the system that's developed, since World War II of free trade and free capital flows. And he'd basically like to do his level best to try to bring as much production, particularly manufacturing, back to the United States through tariffs and whatever other means it takes in order to accomplish that with or without the cooperation of our trading partners.
Hey folks, Check out some of these photos of me on a vacation I took last year. Yep, there's me at the Great Wall of China. This is me at the pyramids. And there I am at Machu Picchu looking like a snack. This vacation made perfect geographical and financial sense. But despite how fantastic this trip looks in all of these pictures, I don't remember it fondly. Why? It looks fun, you might say. Well, I'll tell you why. Because when I returned from my globetrotting adventure, I received a huge roaming bill from my cell phone provider. I know. It hurts me too. What hurts me even worse is that I could have avoided all of this misery if I knew about Airlo. Folks, if your thing is traveling abroad, then you simply gotta know about Airlo. Airlo is the world's first goddamn eSIM store that solves the pain of high roaming bills by giving you instant access to digital SIM cards for over 200 destinations. Right now, they're offering $3 off your first eSIM using the code GOODWORK at checkout. Woo! Airlo is trusted by, count 'em, 15 million world travelers. Here's how it works. When you download the Airlo app, then you shop around for the right eSIM for you depending on where you're going and what you want. And then you download, install, and activate. No awkward trips to the cell phone store talking to a representative in a language you don't speak. No physical packaging that's impossible to open and wasteful. Just pure digital SIM card beauty, folks. This is really what it's all about. Install the free Airlo app today so you can stay connected wherever you travel and use my code GOODWORK to get $3 USD off your first eSIM. Now, if you excuse me, my island cruise is taking off. Now, trying to get inside of the mind of an ardent fan of the musical Cats is pretty dicey, especially when they're the POTUS of the United States. But god damn it, I am business newscaster Daniel Elizabeth Toomey, and I'm gonna try.
I think we have to just take the president at face value when he says that he doesn't like trade deficits. And he doesn't like the idea that all of these countries are selling more to the US than they're buying.
Oh, look, it's Sam Lowe, everybody. Leading European trade expert and author of the Most Favored Nation newsletter.
He doesn't like the fact that when he asks why, he gets a list of regulations and blockers and high tariffs that explain why the US isn't selling more to, say, the EU.
President Trump is extremely hot under the collar over the fact that the US runs an overall trade deficit, meaning we buy more stuff from the rest of the world than the rest of the world buys from us.
They ripped off the United States, ripped off and taken advantage of. We've been ripped off. They ripped us off left and right. But now it's our turn to do the ripping.
Of all of the motives underlying Trump's trade war, this one, that other countries are ripping us off, seems like it's the most easily dismissed as being irrational.
The fact that the United States buys a lot more from others than they buy from the United States, it's not because we're being cheated. It's not because others are manipulating. It's not because of others have tariffs on our products. Some percentage of it is because of that.
Gregory Zuckerman is a veteran finance reporter also for the Wall Street Journal.
Most of it is just because the United States is the wealthiest country in the world. So by definition, we buy more products from others than they buy of ours. I mean, I have a trade deficit with my supermarket. I buy a lot more of their products than they buy of mine. They're not buying my writing. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily cheating me or manipulating me or that we need to do something about it.
Speak for yourself, Gregory. I've been a victim of an unfair trade deficit with my local Kroger for years. And until they start watching this channel, then the bomb threats to their corporate email will continue. I think the problem is that all of this globalized coordination between countries that doesn't get my nads going. Mark Blyth is a professor of international economics at Brown with an unquenchable thirst for rock and roll. I asked him to be my next contestant in understanding the rationale behind President Trump's amazing Technicolor trade war.
Let's think about some of the claims that are being made here. So Europeans have this extra tariffs on American cars. Yes, some of them are bullshit, etc. It's absolutely right. But you know why American cars don't sell in Europe? Because they're crap. Because basically, light truck manufacturer, one of your best sellers is the Ford F-150. You try putting it and driving it on a street anywhere in Italy, and it would get stuck within 5 minutes.
I would love to go on a tour of Florence in my F-150.
Yeah, exactly. You get the point. Right? Most of this stuff is nonsense, just nonsense, and shouldn't be taken seriously.
However, that's right, it's however time. Beneath a lot of the stuff that shouldn't be taken seriously in this trade war are two issues that folks across the political spectrum recognize as quite serious. One, the loss of American manufacturing jobs, and two, the rise of China.
As other countries like China used their cheap labor in order to increase their manufacturing, that benefited American consumers, but it hurt a lot of Americans, particularly in the industrial heartland. And not only did it hurt those workers, but in putting them out of work, it also led to kind of like the degradation of whole communities.
This degradation of American industrial communities is often referred to as China shock, or the enormous increase in Chinese imports into the United States in the 2000s, which was estimated to have cut more than 2 million American jobs. There's also evidence that in the communities hit hardest by this job loss, more people die of drugs, alcohol abuse, and by suicide, which you'll often hear referred to as deaths of despair.
I mean, the really big story in the United States role was essentially saying that we're going to allow and partner with China's rise, and we're all going to benefit from that. That was kind of the permissive consensus. That begins to change basically around 2011, 2012. China has such a comparative advantage in manufacturing that they basically bulldoze everybody else. And that is when the trouble begins to hit, because once you get the China shock, this creates concentrated losses in electorally significant districts. Then it persists for a decade and a half. You get deaths of despair, all the bad stuff, and the reaction to that is part of what we're seeing now.
So trying to boost manufacturing at home is a real thing that all sorts of people think we need to be doing. For example, the Biden administration's big pieces of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, were both aimed at bringing high-value manufacturing jobs back to struggling industrial communities in industries that are going to become increasingly important. Building green infrastructure as the global economy tries to decarbonize, and building microchips as everyone uses AI to turn their dick pics into Studio Ghibli flicks. In fact, last spring, Biden himself actually imposed a sweeping set of tariffs on China, targeting $18 billion worth of goodies.
What Trump has done is to basically say, okay, my version of this, it's all in on massive tariffs, and that's going to lead to reindustrialization. So if you think that's the underlying story, and I think it's a reasonable underlying story, are tariffs one part of this? Yes. Are they the only way to do this and the only step, and are massive tariffs the way to do it? Absolutely not. The thinking stops at tariffs.
And lots of folks agree with the mayor of Guitar City here, that while bringing manufacturing jobs back to hard-hit communities is a worthy goal, just applying a bunch of tariffs isn't going to achieve that. Nevertheless, we continue to crank the tariff amp to 11. That one's for you, Mark. But taking a step back, all of this chaos and uncertainty may actually be hurting the U.S. more than any of the problems we were originally trying to solve.
Those things eventually are going to undermine, I think, the role of the dollar and the role of the U.S. in world affairs. I have had a lot of conversations with foreign economic officials over the last few months. All of them are completely bemused by the policies being undertaken by the current administration. They don't know how to understand them, they don't know how to predict them, and they don't know how to react to them.
That's right, Steve. Never let them know your next move. And also never let them understand your previous move.
Our reporting suggests that foreign governments and trading partners and allies don't really even understand what's on the negotiating table.
Exactly.
If it's just a case that every year he comes back asking for more and ramping up the tariffs further, it means countries have to reconsider their relationship with the US and start thinking about deepening ties elsewhere. So there are long-term consequences from the trust side of things.
One of the top priorities for Canada, for Mexico, for Europe, for China right now, is to figure out how to start de-risking from the United States as much as possible, as fast as possible.
New guy is Brad DeLong, an economic historian and author of Slouching Towards Utopia, a thick old tome that is an economic history of the 20th century. When I asked him about this sticky situation we got our hands on here, he pointed out that the chaos makes it hard to figure out the most basic things, like how real this trade war actually is.
In terms of America's role in the, global trade order, what are the impacts of this trade war that we've seen, that we've already, launched and are in many ways still launching?
First of all, it depends on whether there is actually a trade war, or whether it is the same kind of contest as a World Wrestling Federation match is, that, Donald Trump was in the ring. He went outside the ring. He picked up the chair. He waved the metal folding chair over his head, and he said, I'm going to come into the ring and I'm going to beat you up with the chair. And so the question is, is he going to put the chair down and come back in the ring and have it be a normal wrestling match? Is he going to do it again? Is he going to pick up the chair and wave it around? Either way, we are in substantial trouble. My guess is we're in as much trouble as Britain was after 2016 when they exited from the European Union. But, it might be less, it might be a bunch more.
Meanwhile, the vibes inside of the US right now are, frankly, suboptimal. Consumer sentiment is plunging, with Americans' uncertainty about the country's economic future eclipsing levels last seen during the COVID pandemic. Both market and anecdotal evidence suggests that the US is not seen as a safe haven for investment that it's been for decades. A role that lets us do fun stuff, like run an enormous budget deficit and build military bases wherever we want. And while some small business owners are celebrating the opportunity that tariffs provide them, others that rely on Chinese manufacturing are starting to panic. Some are even starting to sue. All this for a potentially devastating trade war with a country that's not just going to roll over on this one.
Where does it end? See, China's not actually this little kid that could be punched around anymore. They've been diverting away from the US as much as humanly possible into third country markets. They dominate in green tech sectors. I mean, in the sense of bring it, bitch. Let's see who's actually got the cojones here.
Is it almost an impossible task to try and predict where we're going to go from here?
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to try to get in ahead of Donald Trump and people around him to anticipate where things are going. Things could turn on a dime. They could cut some trade deals and reassure markets, and we get back to maybe some semblance of normalcy pretty quickly. And yet the average kind of sophisticated investor taking a step back, or economist and such, realizes that we're in a new world and it's uncharted territory. We haven't really experienced this before, where the United States is taking a step back globally, no longer perhaps the leader when it comes to free markets. I mean, I work at the Wall Street Journal. Our motto is free markets and free people. Well, free markets are under assault right now. So how do we think about the world? It's an interesting time. It's a stimulating time intellectually, but it's also disturbing and even scary.
Interesting, stimulating, disturbing, and even scary. Normally, that's a quatrain that gets me going, folks. But right now, as our country sets sail into uncharted trade waters, guided by a cats-loving, hip-firing captain of chaos, I gotta admit, I'm feeling a little queasy. It's a choppy economic sea we're setting sail into, but all I know is that you and me, throwing up over the bow of this rusty old sloop, CNBC ringing from the loudspeakers on the bridge, seagulls cawing into the air, and the spray of salt penetrating our nostrils? Well, no matter what, I'll be there holding your hair back for every step this ship takes. And that's a promise. All right, for Good Work, I'm Dan Toomey.
You deserve a getaway. You deserve to see the rich history of Rome and the beautiful Italian countryside. You deserve to do it from the four-wheeled comfort of a 2025 Ford F-150. At F-150 Truck Tours, you can rip through the rolling hills of Tuscany, drown out the sounds of the historic Tiber River with the blare of your 5-liter V8 engine, and barrel down those sweet old nonas shuffling through the plazas of Venice while jamming out to Leonard Skinner. And if you act now, you can get the special Vatican package, which includes a free drag race with the Pope Mobile to fight for a spot in heaven. the Ford F-150 experience. Come see the true meaning of Italian American.